One of the true sports medicine emergencies happened earlier this evening as Evander Kane's left wrist was accidentally cut by Pat Maroon's skate. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and this is your number one source for learning about the medical side of the sports world. Right away, some reassurance here. The Oilers have announced that Kane is stable. He's on his way to the hospital for a procedure later this evening, so at least the acute life-threatening nature of this has been stabilized, and Kane is going to go get the more definitive treatment that he needs. But it's certainly not something we've talked about before, and so I want to walk through the acute management that we're doing on the ice, and then the more definitive evaluation and treatment. Lacerations are one of the scariest things when we're covering hockey, and it's something that if you're covering hockey, you need to be prepared for managing these, including suturing things up and the emergent situation where we potentially have an arterial bleed. There's just so many exposed areas of skin that I'm frankly surprised this doesn't happen more often, especially when goalies are falling down. And we of course all remember what happened with Clint Marlichuk, where he got cut in the neck. So something that all providers who are covering hockey at any level are prepared to deal with. If we look at the position of Kane's left arm, his thumb is pointed upwards, and so that's going to expose what we call the radial side of his wrist. That's the thumb side. And on that side, the major blood vessel we worry about is the radial artery. You might be able to feel it on yourself if you want to check your pulse on more the palm side of your wrist. Sometimes it can be deeper in people, so it's not going to be as superficial as the veins under our skin, but on that radial kind of dorsal side of the wrist, we're worried about the radial artery. Now, as bad as it looks, it's easier to repair a cut to an artery that's from a very clean, straight, sharp edge, as opposed to something that's rough and ragged that's going to cause a lot more damage. So something like a super sharp skate blade coming through on one clean slice is going to be much easier for the doctors to repair than something that's really rough and ragged or goes longitudinally along the artery with a much bigger opening. And like I said, that artery is a little bit deeper, and so there's not even really a guarantee that this would have cut the radial artery because it doesn't look like a direct puncture from the skate as opposed to just a slice across the top. So a couple things that are at least reassuring that would affect what we're trying to do when he gets back to the locker room to stabilize it, to close it off, and then ultimately at the hospital. Step one with acute management is apply direct pressure. We can see Kane did this right away. He astutely recognized what had happened and knew to immediately put pressure over the cut area. This is the quickest thing you can do to provide what we call hemostasis. We're trying to basically occlude the bleeding blood vessel, whether it's an artery or a vein or even just the skin, to clamp those blood vessels down and limit the bleeding as much as possible right away. But it takes a lot of direct pressure applied over a long period of time to ultimately get the bleeding to stop. And if it's an artery that's bleeding, it's going to be even harder to do. So when we get back to the dressing room, we're going to start working on sort of next level treatments to try to initially calm the bleeding down and then assess what the injury was. A couple of ways that we'll do that beyond just direct pressure to the area of the bleed is to apply a tourniquet. Arteries are taking blood from the heart to the periphery, and veins are returning low pressure blood from the periphery back to the heart. So one way to tell if something is an arterial or a venous bleed is if it's arterial, there's probably going to be some squirting. It might be pulsatile because of the beats of the heart. So what we're trying to do if we have a cut down here at the wrist with a tourniquet is apply pressure higher up to basically stop that blood getting there before it gets to the cut. One way to do this is with just even a blood pressure cuff that we can manually pump up high enough above the systolic blood pressure of the heart beating. Medical kits at these hockey games, though, probably have higher quality tourniquets to basically just strap off across the arm as best as possible to occlude the blood vessels that are higher up. Then it's a question of what you can do in terms of assessing where the cut is, and if it's a structure like an artery or just the skin, if it's something that you need to directly try to stitch up, or if you're trying to just cause coagulation or clotting before you can eventually get somewhere where you can stitch it up. If you're able to just apply direct pressure to the area and not do a big hole tourniquet, but just direct pressure to get things to close off, our body is smart enough when it developed that we have collateral blood flow. So there's arteries on the other side of the wrist, the ulnar side, that come through and actually feed into the hands and the fingers through this collateral circulation. So just because you close off the blood flow on one side doesn't mean you're necessarily going to lose all of your blood flow to the hand because you have some collateral flow. So step one, at the arena, we're doing everything possible to, number one, stop the acute hemorrhaging, whether that's direct pressure, a tourniquet, maybe having to throw in a couple of stitches, but get them stable, stop the acute hemorrhage, and then ultimately get to the hospital for the more definitive evaluation and final treatment. With our anatomy model here, you'll see all these yellow structures. Those are all nerves. Nerves run hand in hand with blood vessels. So if there's been a cut to an artery, chances are there might have been a cut to a nerve as well, or you at least need to evaluate for the nerve damage. Now, on this radial side of the wrist, there's not really a significant motor nerve. Your median nerve, which we all know about with carpal tunnel, is a little bit more in the direct middle of your palm, and on the backside of your wrist is more cutaneous, meaning sensory nerves. There's actually no muscles in the hand that are innervated by the radial nerve. That all stops up in the elbow. So a cut down here at the wrist is probably going to have less of a chance of causing motor impairment to the hand, but can certainly cause sensory impairment if it hits those sensory nerves. But of course, there's more than just blood vessels and nerves in this area. We have muscles and tendons. And functionally, that's the bigger thing I'd be worried about here long term, and what the hand surgeons are going to have to evaluate at the hospital once the bleeding is under control. Because again, even more superficial to the artery are going to be these tendons. Tendons specifically on this side of the wrist that are going to point your thumb up, that are going to bend your thumb backwards, and then help to kind of straighten your fingers in your wrist. On the palm side are going to be the tendons that curl your fingers in and flex your wrist. So when we see an injury kind of mechanism like this, where that skate is coming through, remember, there's more than just blood vessels. The blood vessels are the acute, get it under control, get it stabilized sort of thing. But then ultimately, functionally for an athlete or any individual, it's going to come down to, are there any damages to the tendons? Have any of those muscles been cut? And have the nerves been affected in any way? By all accounts, it seems like the medical staff did a fantastic job. Kane did a great job getting pressure on there right away, getting off the ice. And as I said before, he's stable. They've said he's going to be okay, and he'll have more definitive management later at the hospital. If this cut is deep enough to injure the artery, which I worry about just based on what we saw on the ice, then chances are pretty high of something being injured to the tendons in the wrist or the nerves as well, which again are going to be the functional things that will ultimately dictate a return to hockey more than just the cut to the skin or the vessels. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and I hope this was educational to talk through some of the things we're considering both acutely on the ice and in the follow-up evaluation. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.